Deep Tech Bite. Hello and welcome to Deep Tech Bytes, a three-part podcast from SGInnovate and me, Neal Moore, your host for a series of fascinating conversations with the world's leading thinkers, innovators and investors who, by no coincidence, are based in the global tech hub of Singapore. But what is deep tech, you may ask? Well, that's what we're going to address in episode 1. But what I will tell you up front is that it's not about the apps and gadgets that fit in your pocket and dose you with dopamine. It goes way deeper than that. So now's the time for you to decide, are you going to take the red pill or the blue pill? Excellent choice. Okay, let's dive into the deep end of tech and find out what it is, who's investing in it, and how much it's worth. Today, I'm joined remotely by Aditya Mathur, who's the managing director of venture capital firm Elevate.vc, and Victor Tan, director of venture investing at SGInnovate. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us, Neal.
Thanks for having us, Neal.
Total pleasure. Now, I've got your job titles, but they don't really tell me what it is you do. So perhaps, Victor, we can start with you. What do you actually do?
So I'm from SGInnovate, and I actually manage all our investment deals and operations here at SGInnovate. And I've been doing that for the past 3 years.
And Aditya, when it says VC after your name, I'm thinking that you fly around on private jets and drink Moe and jacuzzis. Am I right?
Sounds great.
I wish. We work the long hours as well. We love getting into the trenches with some of the deep tech companies we like to invest in and really help them grow and scale.
Marvelous. Now, you're both investing in deep tech. And what I want to do is start by establishing what exactly we mean by deep tech. So, Aditya, you go first. Give me that definition you hold of deep tech.
Sure. To me, deep tech has two key pillars. The first is a transformational technology that's driven by a meaningful engineering innovation, or most importantly, a scientific discovery. And the second is I truly believe deep tech companies will have a strong and meaningful societal impact.
I definitely agree. I think, that these transformational technologies are not made possible, in a day or a week or a month, right? And therefore, there's one of the core tenets of actually the study of deep technology is the substantial amount of R&D and time and money that's required, to help develop some of these ideas into actual products. And that actually forms a key area of defensibility for deep technology startups, right? So as a business, you are sitting on an IP that took you a long time to develop and a lot of money too. And most of the companies in this space will be characterized by that. Strong IP and high defensibility that took a long time to create.
Okay, that's fantastic. That's really crisp. Now, let's move on. What technologies qualify as deep tech?
Okay, so I would say that it's a pretty wide-ranging area. For SGInnovate, and I think Elevate also, we look at specific sectors in which we are able to execute upon our deep tech strategies, right? So sector-wise, we look at a lot of areas around mobility, right? How do we perceive the mobility of tomorrow? What that means is, how do vehicles move in the future? Is it by themselves? And if they move by themselves, how are we going to enable that to happen? Does that help in terms of safety? How does that enable people who can't have access, to mobility options now and to have that in the future, right? So technologies such as LiDARs, radars, and even like self-driving vehicles. How do we get that out into the market as quickly as possible? A second big area that we look at is actually healthcare. How can we enable healthcare to be more efficient, right, and more accurate and more affordable in the long term via the innovations that we are able to produce via deep tech? So as I previously mentioned, in terms of scanning, in terms of providing, more accurate reports to the patients, how can we help to do that? And that's a big area that a lot of people within our space are looking at. Other areas include Industry 4.0 or 5.0, right? How do we help to enable the industries of tomorrow to perform more efficiently? So think about it, right? How does Amazon, understand which package needs to go where in the most efficient way possible? Well, it sounds really simple, but actually behind it, there's a lot of science that helps them to determine algorithmically, what's the best way for packages to move, right? And that is all enabled by a lot of deep tech, even in the warehouses. So how does the machine automatically know which boxes to pick up? That's enabled by computer vision. How do we enable a full warehouse without humans, right? That's done by robotics, and the list goes on. So these are, I think, key areas that we are trying to develop. Moving forward, there are key areas that the world is facing in terms of problems, whether it's on the food and sustainability part. How do we make sure there's enough food and access, to the right types of food globally? And how do you make sure that everything is traceable? Right? I think these are future things that people are thinking about, and the list goes on. So I would say these are some of the areas that we define within our coverage as deep tech investors. There's definitely more beyond that. Aditya, I'm sure you'll be able to share a couple more.
Yeah, I think a famous VC that all of us know recently said the time now is to build. And, it's a time to build in areas that you think are going to have the most meaningful impact on the world. And I go back to some of the verticals that both Victor and I were talking about earlier, from Industry 5.0, which is what we call the artificial intelligence of things, where every piece of machinery and sensor around the world in warehouses, in fish farms, etc., all connected to large data centers where we can take actionable readings off of them out to health tech and autonomous vehicles. I think one of the areas that we are very bullish on that brings all these different technologies together is communications. For any of these products to work, you need a very strong ability to have data processed both at the edge and have it transferred across, large amounts of data transferred across to computational centers around the world. So you need far better 5G networks, you need far better Wi-Fi speeds, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another area that we think is ripe for terrific growth right now.
So deep tech strikes me as also being, hugely ambitious in its scope and also in what's required to make it work. So that brings me to really the core question of this particular episode of our podcast, which is about business models. If you're trying to do something substantial that takes a long time to develop, a long time to bring to market, my question is, what kind of business models can work for technologies like that? And I suppose, Aditya, you're investing, a lot at the moment. How do you make that decision, and what kind of business models are you looking for, and are you seeing that are working?
So if I can take a step back, Neal, to try and answer that question, I think there are two things that are happening today in the deep tech world that work for us as an investor. Of course, as an investor into deep tech, we do have to have a slightly longer gestation period than most. But there are a couple of things that are coming together. One is you have far better advanced engineering, edge computing, as well as proliferation of data and data collection. These conflate to provide you the ability to design, build, measure, and iterate far faster than you've ever been able to do before. So I generally think the experiments that you need to do to develop these proprietary technologies are becoming faster, are becoming cheaper at magnitudes that had never happened before. So we're very excited to be in this space at this specific time. So earlier, where things would take 30 years to develop, we believe similar leaps in technology can be done with all these conflating mechanisms in 3 to 4 years instead, which makes it far more investable for us. The other thing, which we touched upon very briefly, is who can we work with to truly commercialize such products quickly? So on the one hand, we've talked about this iterative cycle which develops products, but then who do you partner with? Who do you work with? How do you sell to customers and potential CVCs, or who could also be investors, to really help you scale your product quickly and get it out there? And the third thing, which I truly believe is happening right now, is folks are looking for durable returns. We've talked about an example like Intel in the past. If you look at an Intel, they had durable returns. When you invested, they created, or in the early days of the investment, you were able to provide immeasurable growth of the company, and you could still today look to try and reap your rewards as an investor. More clearly for me, just going from my own personal experience, the last two companies I worked for, one was in semiconductors and power management. So a hardware company that was acquired by Infineon for over $3 billion. And the last company that I worked for, called Jasper, we were acquired by Cisco for $1.4 billion. In both cases, while our life cycle wasn't 3 years, it was a bit longer than that. Our exits were very profitable for not just the investors, but also for our customers, as well as for the employees of the company.
Victor, Aditya mentioned there partnerships being quite important. And I know that SGInnovate, part of your job is to find those partners. What business models have you seen, and what are the ones that your partners are interested in and are going to work with you to develop?
Sure. I think like the way we look at this is two parts, right? One is in terms of how is the company being built, right? And typically, the answer around the business model actually hovers around what deep tech actually is. being deep tech itself is the business model, right? So one, meaning that it has critical proprietary technologies, whether it's via research or via a piece of hardware that they've developed. And the second part is around the time that it's taken to develop that proprietary technology, right? So that alone creates a level of defensibility, for the product and for the company on which that the rest of the business is built on, right? So because they are so far ahead, they have a lead in the market before someone else gets there, right? So now, then the next problem is, how do I commercialize that technology? So while I have this really awesome, shiny thing, how am I going to make money from it? And typically, deep tech products or services are not sold on their own. They're typically part of a much larger solution that could be already in the market and provided by a big MNC or a big corporate, and I think the difficulty, right, for the deep tech ecosystem in general is finding that path to commercialization. How do I move something that is nice and shiny and new into the hands of someone who can help me to show me, how I can actually apply it across a multitude of applications? And that's where, we've tried partner with the best in the industry, whether it's existing industrial players, big industrial players from around the world, partnering up with other great investors who also have connections into these companies and partners, and giving our founders access, right, to those guys. Without what Aditya said earlier on, which is commercialization, there's no end in sight for any technology that we develop within the ecosystem. So for us, we invest definitely on that basis.
Okay. Now you mentioned founders there, and within the world of tech, founders, they're the new rock stars, right? Entrepreneurs are the new rock stars.
Yes.
Where do you find these people? Are you just walking into garages, around Silicon Valley or something? How do you find these people who have these mad ideas, these scientific discoveries? Where do they come from, Aditya?
We've found our deal flows coming from very specific areas. We love the core verticals that we work in, and we have very strong relationships and networks within those core verticals. So whether it's within the automotive market or within the health tech market, we typically find both from our LP base, from customers we have or currently work with, and in many cases, as Victor pointed out, from incredible like-minded VCs like SGInnovate. We are introduced to some terrifically smart folks with incredible technologies that we would like to help take to market. The other source that I am incredibly grateful to the Singapore government for, and this includes some of the excellent work that SGInnovate is helping fund, is the sort of innovation that's coming out of the universities and research labs of Singapore. We personally have been working closely with NTU, with SMU, and with a number of other excellent PhD and research universities in Singapore to see which of their products can come out and which can scale into excellent businesses. So to us, these are the two key areas that we are seeing an incredible amount of excellent deal flow from.
That's good to hear about Singapore. Victor, obviously you're slightly biased here, but where do we stand on the where do we stand on the global stage of deep tech innovation? Are we churning out rock stars here?
Oh, okay. So to be fair to the ecosystem industry, it's only been 3 years, right? In terms of us fully coming to an understanding of, that it's actually possible to create a deep tech startup and actually make money from it, right? I would say that deep tech itself has been called other names in Singapore, and I think the country has been investing in this space for forever. I mean, like, Singapore has invested approximately about $60 billion into the hard sciences and engineering, since 1995. So it's actually been something that we know that we are reasonably strong in, right? And I think the number was, as of 2017, we had about 35,000 research scientists and engineers working in Singapore. So I think there has been a lot of money and a lot of effort being poured into the industry. And I think what we have tried to do as an organization and along with all the partners is, how can we catalyze this new movement of helping all our scientists to commercialize the ideas and actually being able to get them to market even faster. And if you look at the numbers over the past 3 years, I think, over the past 9 years, I would say 2010 to 2019, I think the number of deep tech venture deals actually grew around 30x. Right, which is about 129 deals. Yeah, and that's a lot for a small country like Singapore, and so I think the past 3 years has been crucial. But I also believe that this long history of us investing into the space helped to grow the right talent, to grow the right people within the industry, the support mechanisms, and it just gives Aditya and I a much easier job in terms of picking from the best, right? And that moves on to your question about deal flow, right? So we get deal flow is the lifeblood of any VC. And I think all of us, especially for deep tech, will take it from a few places, right? So the pool of like-minded investors is critical because there is only a small group of us that do this. So it's best that we share our thoughts and ideas and companies. I think the universities and research institutes are a key source of companies because, when you have a difficult problem to solve, you want to throw it, you'll think that there's a researcher somewhere thinking about that problem with you. And there probably is. To be fair, there's no original problem on earth, and there's definitely someone trying to think about a solution. And I think in the newer trend, is around looking at accelerators and incubators that are focused on IP-driven startups, especially on hard tech-driven startups, right? And that's taken rise over the past 4 or 5 years. We are seeing some pretty interesting deal flow coming out of there also.
Deep Tech Byte. You both mentioned there this route to commercialization, which is obviously essential if we want to see those kinds of exits that Aditya was talking about just now. What is that route? How difficult is it? How do you guys play a part in getting a sort of genius idea to work in a business context?
Sure. I think there's 3 key areas if I'm to summarize this quickly. The first is productization. How do you take this great technology and spin it into a product which has a clear market fit, good pricing strategies, and is able to pivot nimbly to really meet what the market needs? The second is, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you create that moat around you? Yes, you've got this technology, but from a technology perspective, how do you get the regulatory or the IP moat so that no one can just come in and copy you in the next year or two? From a commercialization perspective, also, how do you create that moat? How do you create explosive growth and really be a tough company to compete with from a distribution perspective as well? And third is growth. And this is where we as a VC truly believe we have a large part to play. Victor mentioned how the ecosystem is just 3 years old. Therefore, the role of the VC in the commercialization, the growth piece perhaps becomes one of the biggest and most important. You've got to have the ability to support the founders, to do the global BD, to create the partnerships with the right global partners to really help them scale quickly. So to me, it's productization, differentiation, and growth.
It sounds so smooth, Aditya. It sounds so easy. Victor, it can't always be that easy. What are the problems? What gets in the way?
Everything. Everything is a problem, right? For a startup, even waking
Victor,
up the next day is a problem.
I'm glad he asked you that question.
Thank goodness. Well, Neal, there are so many problems that I don't even know where to begin. But some of the key challenges, let's not call them problems, right? I think these are challenges and they can be overcome. So as a company, I think being able to find sufficient funding, to sustain their growth is going to be the theme, right, of the problems, right? And that theme permeates into everyday decisions, such as, do I know what problem I'm solving, right? And after that, do I know how much it would take for me to solve the problem to a point where someone can fund me, right? And after that, after someone funds me, what is the next step? How do I get it to more hands and more eyes and more potential use cases, right? And how do I get someone to fund me for that? So it's always a question of what is the problem? How do I get someone to pay for it? And that is taken into stages. So in the beginning, trying to go from zero to at least a proof of concept, finding, showing the market that it actually works. And then later on from the proof of concept, to finding actual use cases within an industry. And then actually finding a company or companies, willing to take that to much larger scale. Now, the problems underlying that will involve everything from funding to talent, and also, just day-to-day management of a company. Just like running, you have founder problems, you have personality issues, and can you imagine in an industry where there's not enough talent, when everybody has a problem with each other, how do we find a solution to that? Right. So I think the problems are fairly common across any kind of enterprise trying to get off its feet. But I think for deep tech specifically, I think talent remains a big issue, not just for Singapore, but for the world, right? Because to get someone who's able to understand deep tech requires a long amount of education, and as it is, it's only a small percentage of the overall global population that has that kind of education. And then of that population, you need to find people who are willing to take a leap of faith, and actually become an entrepreneur, right? So removing, the comfort of a tenure or comfort of a good job to actually run a company, which is funded on a day-to-day basis, right? So I think talent remains some of the biggest issues that we're trying to solve as an organization. I think as a country, right? And I think we continue to do that.
Well, talent is going to be tackled in the next episode, but interestingly here, this relationship between the startup and the VC, it sounds like, yes, the VC is the money, but so much more. Is this type of investment for everybody, Aditya? What does it take to be a good VC in this field, in this deep tech field?
I think it takes a few key things. Number one, so deep tech, as you rightly pointed out, Neil, and have rightly pointed out at various points of our discussion, deep tech covers so many different areas. I think the first and most important thing as a deep tech investor is you've got to know what your strengths are. Only invest in areas and verticals that you know well and that you think you can bring companies to market in a reasonable amount of time. And the second thing is you have to be able to be comfortable with looking for durable returns instead of looking to flip businesses in 6 months. An example of that, and if I can give extreme examples of that, we talked about tech-enabled companies versus deep tech companies. If you look at a company like WeWork, you could have made great money as a very smart investor if you knew when to exit. On the other hand, if you look at a truly deep tech company like Intel, you didn't have to time your exit to be favorable, but you had to wait a bit of time before the ecosystem developed. So I think those are the two key criteria as a deep tech investor that you need to be very careful of. Gosh, I never get this word right. Specificity in the verticals. Yeah.
Victor,
so
is that
specific?
What
there you go.
Victor, is that? Would you agree with that? Are these the key attributes of a good VC? Are you bringing more or less to the table there?
Yeah, definitely. And to add on, I think there's a lot of other work that Aditya is doing that he's not telling you about, and that's something that we're all trying to also add on in terms of value. I think the VC brings to the table, hopefully, the right types of connections and linkages that will help these companies to move faster. So beyond the money, it is about how they can make use of us to accelerate their growth. So I always tell the companies, if I can't provide you any value, then don't take my money, because there's no point in just taking money for the sake of taking money, because there's a lot of money in the world. Right? So how do I
strongly agree with that?
Yeah, exactly. And how do we give you that extra value? Is it because I know a lot of people in a deep tech space that I can connect you to? Please use me, right? Is it because I can get you into the hands of some industrial customers? Please use me for that. So I think the investor needs to quantify to the startups, right? What is their value in the relationship? Yeah, and I think, and that's a challenge, right? So for us to continually always be able to provide value in any way possible, talent, money, connections, that is our daily, kind of reflection, right? Can we continue to do that every day? And if we can't, how do we continue to enable ourselves, to enable these companies to become better and move faster?
So right now, what's got you most excited? I understand the whole realm of deep tech, but Aditya mentioned there are vertical markets, there are areas where you have more or less knowledge, or there's particular opportunities.
I think we're definitely excited about what's happening now, right? So in terms of, mobility, how with the future of cars moving by themselves, and also like in healthcare, But I think what's really exciting for us are actually the moonshot that we're taking, right? So some of the things that are so far out and so complex that, it took me a while to understand. For example, looking at quantum technologies, right? So this was something that, that we took a deep dive on like 3 years ago, and we haven't looked back since, right? I think 3 years ago, everyone would have thought that you were either crazy, or a genius, because no one was looking at this space, not knowing what it actually entailed, right? And it only came to kind of like more public light, when Google and a whole bunch of other companies started to announce some of the things that they had for the quantum space. And we believe that quantum is the next generation of computation that will help to enable a lot of things today to move faster. Everything we do today, technology-wise, is always bound by the limits of computation, right? And quantum is one way to actually help us to exponentially increase that. And it has applications in everything from communications, to security. And you'll be amazed at the types of corporations that are approaching us to understand what quantum is. I would never have thought that a bank would want to know what quantum internet does, 3 years ago. But that's the kind of people that we're talking to today, right? In terms of like, hey, I would love to speak to your quantum company. I'm like, you, a bank? For what? So I think these are conversations that have opened up in this process, and I think Aditya and I have had some common investments in this space,
Yes.
And we're super excited about the potential and future of this.
You're into quantum too, Aditya? Is that what gets you excited, gets you up out of bed in the morning?
Absolutely. I think, like Victor mentioned, we have looked at and invested together in quantum before. we love Moonshot, and therefore we think we're very like-minded with SGInnovate on that front. However, if I were to just look at one specific vertical, I would say today the thing that gets me out of bed is health tech. I think that's the need of the hour for the world, whether you take individuals or you take the global economy. The health of both is poor if we can't improve both accessibility to healthcare as well as have completely new ways of thinking about how to diagnose and administer healthcare using completely new methods of technologies to the masses. So to me, health tech is front of and center of mind for me.
And just potentially revolutionary, which is amazing. Victor, I want to bring this to an end, but I just want to speak to you about, look, we're Singapore. We're called the red dot because, the red dot on the map is bigger than us. We seem to be making huge waves here. How's this come about? How has SGInnovate come about and made this huge splash?
It's been quite a journey. I mean, we've been really lucky to have found, like-minded partners along the way. At the same time, I think the community has really come back, showed up in force, right, to actually sustain and help us grow this ecosystem that we work in every day. The past 3 years, what I've seen, is actually more individuals who are stepping up to be founders in the space, and they're enabled because we have a multitude of funding sources that are friendly to founders from the government. There are investors who understand what they're trying to do, and we try to help them kind of grow and move faster at the same time. We are also seeing a lot of research institutes and educational institutions, universities, actually also stepping up, right, and forming programs of their own to actually help to accelerate the growth of their own IP from their schools and their students to help them commercialize into the market, right? So, and then they work with investors like us, to help to move these guys into the right spaces. And I think the ecosystem itself is really young. And I keep saying that because we are only 3 years. And look at what we've achieved. So I can only see this going up. I believe that, there are so many more ways that we can help to build up this ecosystem. I think is in terms of connections into the region, globally into the larger markets. How do we help to cement that? How do we help create a repeatable process, right? Which, will still be around when I leave. I think trying to institutionalize some of these mechanisms, would really help our founders, and our ecosystem to continue growing at a sustainable pace.
And Aditya, you're someone who, you can invest anywhere, I would imagine. What is it about Singapore? Why are you putting money here?
For a few reasons. One is I think you do have the two big boys of the US and China. But immediately after that, I strongly believe that deep tech has maybe 3 other global centers, of which I think Singapore is putting the right infrastructure around, from a government investment perspective into research, from a regulatory perspective, and some of the most innovative legislation that's going out into even creating ecosystems for autonomous vehicles. And third, which I think is very important, is an ecosystem of investors like SGInnovate, who, by the way, I truly think walk the talk, different corporates, as well as angel investors, as well as CVCs and venture capital firms like ourselves, where we truly want to add value. And I think that was a point which Victor made, and I just want to echo that again. I think this entire ecosystem is being built around the ability to add value to some of these deep tech companies that are coming out of Singapore. And that's what excites me. I think Victor mentioned something like $60 billion into deep tech, into fundamental research of science and technology. And you would be hard-pressed to find any other dot, red or otherwise, where you are coming up with such a large base of fundamental research that should be developing an excellent pipeline of deep tech companies. I'm very excited about what Singapore is about to produce.
That's a phenomenal number and just incredibly inspiring. Gentlemen, this is the first of a series of 3, and you've kicked it off with great insight and advice and good humor. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thanks, Neal.
Thanks, Neal. Thanks, Victor.
Thank you, Aditya.
Thanks for joining me and my guests for the first in this 3-part series from SGInnovate exploring deep tech. SGInnovate's mission is to help entrepreneurial scientists build deep tech startups to solve some of the world's hardest problems. In the next episode, we tackle the problem of recruiting and retaining deep tech talent in a hyper-competitive world. Whether you're an entrepreneur or investor, recruiter or recruitee, subscribe to Deep Tech Bytes on iTunes and Spotify, and join the fastest growing deep tech community in Singapore at sginnovate.com.